What's up, guys? I already know what you're here for, so I'm just gonna jump right into it. Starting with Plymouth. Aside from her high stats, expected of a DR, what jumps out is her 3 main gun mounts, on top of having some really good torps, which puts her as the highest damaging light cruiser in the game as of now. It's not the strongest if we consider other hull classes as well, like the destroyers and large cruisers, but it's pretty good damage. And in terms of survivability, she is just under Noshiro for one fight, but since over here she has a heal skill, after 2 heals, she exceeds Noshiro in tankiness. Her first skill, kind of boring, just some buffs. And then her second skill, she has damage reduction and the heal as mentioned before. And then there's pretty significant 18% damage buff for your flagship battleship. And then she's also got this 10% bonus damage against light and medium armored enemies, which is good considering the mods of light cruiser guns. In general, they're not that good against heavy anyway. She's also got a pretty good barrage in terms of damage. We can take a look at the pattern here. Yeah, pretty solid. Putting it all together with the combination of her bulk, damage, as well as the significant buff to your flagship battleship, she'll likely be a mainstay in any fleet that has a strong flagship battleship. Next up, we've got Brest. Her stats are pretty typical among the large cruisers that we've got so far. She also has a Ghost Ox at Def 10 and high efficiency DD secondary gun, which is really nice. First skill, boring again. Actually, both of them are pretty boring, just a bunch of buffs that are permanent. In total, she's got 25% evasion, 12% damage reduction, as well as some heals, which makes her really tanky. And then the typical large cruiser, 4 shots for a barrage. Her tankiness is just below A gears for a single battle, but since she has a heal, which procs reliably every fight, unlike Kron, she exceeds A gear in terms of tankiness after 2 fights. So she's either the second tankiest large cruiser or the tankiest, depending on how many fights you're doing with her. In terms of damage, she should be a little bit stronger than A gear, but weaker than Kron. How much weaker? I'm not sure, but we can see that she's missing an entire barrage, and her barrage is actually also weaker than the other large cruisers so far, unfortunately. Her Ox gun also, I believe, is a little bit weaker as well. But the one thing she does have going for her is you can buff her with Richelieu, which I think if you buff her with Richelieu, it'll put her above an unbuffed Kron. But Kron also has her cross fleet buffs, so overall I think she is not as good as Kron. I feel like they should have made her a little stronger since she doesn't have the buffs that Kron has, but they held back. Next up we have Chkalov. She's got a good aviation stat and good accuracy as well. She doesn't have any fighters, so her light and medium single target damage will suffer, but her heavy damage should be really good. And then she has a barrage with a bunch of parallel torps that has pretty decent damage, and another barrage when her airstrike is ready, which reduces the AA of enemies hit by 10%, helping out all your other carriers. The debuff lasts until the end of battle. She also has 10% bonus damage against medium and heavy armor enemies, but since she's lacking fighters, you're probably not going to use her against medium enemies most of the time, but she should be good against heavy. She is, however, lacking in self buffs compared to the recently released carriers, so her damage is likely going to be a little bit lower in return for assisting your other carriers. Next, we've got, I can't really pronounce her name, so I'm just going to call her KMS Izumo, because that's pretty much what she is. I don't know why they did this, but she's essentially a worse Odin. Just remove everything that's unique about Odin, and then give her this barrage when the main gun fires. So it's pretty much just another Izumo for this season. She has a Ghost Ox, just like Odin, but it's not as strong, unfortunately. Overall, she's just the typical barrage on fire battleship, but her damage isn't particularly high, so she's got nothing much going for her. At least she can go off flag unlike Izumo. Lastly, we have Harbin, who's pretty much just a destroyer in disguise. She's got reduced torpedo spread, which is something unique to destroyers, and she's got strong torpedoes as well, and 10 shots to proc her all-out assault, which is usually reserved for single gun destroyers, but she has 2. Overall, her damage looks to be really good, but since she has no survivability skills other than torp damage taken minus 10%, she's squishier than most of the good destroyers that are used nowadays. If you like her, you can squish her between two ships, and she'll do a decent amount of damage, but otherwise, she has pretty much no utility. Especially being in the same season as Plymouth, she doesn't really stand out in any way whatsoever. It's not like in PR4 where there was a A-gear and Anchorage situation, where in some situations you would pick one, and some other situations you would pick the other. Here, Plymouth is pretty much just better in every single way. Next, we got equipments. Yeah, the planes are both pretty useless. So starting with the dive bomber, it's just a bunch of spread out garbage, and it's slow. And then the torpedo bomber, I'm pretty sure it's just worse than Wyvern. The 6 torp thing could be interesting, but the issue is that it's very, very slow at 12.5 seconds, which makes it not ideal for mobs despite being parallel. Next, we've got the Rainbow Quad CL gun. To be honest, I'm a little bit disappointed. It's weaker than the Seattle gun against light, as you can see here. It's stronger against medium and heavy, but it's got an 18-degree spread compared to Seattle gun 16. And obviously, the AP gun in Gear Lab has even less spread. If you saw my other video where I compared these two, this one was stronger by 10% because of the hit rate. So I'm not even sure that this rainbow gun with the 18-degree spread would beat in terms of realistic DPS. And then against light, it just loses. Against heavy, it's the strongest, but I mean, the damage is still pretty pathetic there, so you're likely not going to be taking light cruiser guns to deal with heavy armor at the end of the day. The 65 FP is nice, but for a rainbow, it's honestly a little bit lackluster. For a quick comparison, here we have the DD AP gun, which, as you can see, is pretty much better because it's got comparable light and medium damage, but then, you know, it's got like half the reload here. 1.5 seconds as opposed to 3.1. So yeah, here's your rainbow light cruiser gun, which is just worse than a gold destroyer gun. I would not recommend going for plus 13 on this thing, unfortunately. Anyway, moving on. This destroyer gun is just a downgrade of Tashkent gun. It's got 10 more AA, which is like the only thing. I really wouldn't use it most of the time over the 2114 for a main gun, but it does have the extra range, so they could definitely see some use as a BB secondary, seeing as how it's got the extra range as well as the highest FP, and then bonus 10 AA. And depending on the map, the range could also come in handy as well. But overall, it's just the Tash gun downgrade. If you don't need any extra dash guns, then you probably won't be needing this thing. And then we've got this thing, which is just worse than the Italian one. You can see, same reload, lower damage, lower range, so it's literally useless. Lastly, we have Brest's quad CB gun. On paper, it looks okay, because it's got the highest heavy DPS, but it's a bit slow, and I don't know if this is wrong, but it seems to say that the spread is 21, which I'm pretty sure is wrong. It should be 10, so it's worth making one just for the heavy armor DPS when you need it. Moving on. The augments. So, John Bart, the augment is okay. It's better than not having a unique augment, I guess, but it's not the greatest. This barrage adds about 15% DPS to her, which is obviously good, but it doesn't really fix her in the sense that you would take her over another ship because of this thing. But it is good though. So if you like her, which I do, it's not a bad idea to make it. And then the glorious one, good luck. And then what else do we got here? Free evaluations coming soon. Okay, I agree. Alright, so to wrap things up, Plymouth is probably going to be used a lot. Brest, not so much. Unless if you're using her with Richelieu, then she's pretty strong. Chkalov might see some use against heavy armor, especially if the enemy has a lot of AA. And then this is right here is Izumo. If you like her, you can use her. She's usable. But I don't really see any reason to use her in particular over another ship otherwise. Same goes for Harbin. If you like her, then I guess you could switch her between two other ships and she'll do some pretty decent damage. Otherwise, she's got nothing much going for her. In comparison to PR4, this season feels a little bit lackluster. And I feel like they didn't release the Fate Sims because they would just overshadow the new ships. I'm most likely going to be rushing the ships and then going back to PR4 to get more Tenrai, because the equipments this season are just pretty bunk. The rainbow gun might be nice to have if it was in rainbow, and then at most you'll need one of the CB gun and then maybe like a couple of the DD guns, and that's pretty much it. So anyway, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed and have a nice day.